On the night of March 17th, 1995, something strange happened in the quiet lakeside city of Pickering, Ontario. 6 teenage boys vanished mysteriously due to unknown circumstances that continue to haunt families, investigators, and true crime buffs. Despite extensive searches, multiple leads, and decades of speculation, no definitive evidence has ever explained where these teens went or what truly happened that night. Parents waited for sons who did not come home. Friends assumed somebody else had heard from them. Police initially believed they were simply runaways. But as weeks turned into months and months turned into years, one chilling question refused to go away. How could 6 boys vanish and no one know why? Welcome to the Strange and Undecided podcast.
That was a good intro.
6 teenagers. Wow.
Welcome back to the Strange and Undecided podcast. I'm your producer and host, Jarrett, joined by my co-hosts,
Brando.
Patrick.
So we're back on an unsolved case, as we kind of talked about in our last episode, that those are our favorite cases to discuss things. So I figured I would find one because it is unsolved still and nobody knows anything about it.
Can't wait to hear more.
I'm surprised I never heard of this one. 6 teenage boys disappearing. That's a doozy.
Yeah, 1995. So it was a long time ago, but you'd think that something like this that was a cold case still, you'd hear about it, but nope, nothing. So with that being said, this is The Lost Boys of Pickering. In 1995, Pickering, Ontario was a growing city. Located along the northern shore of Lake Ontario, just east of Toronto, it was what some described as a perfect balance of suburban calm with the restless energy of the nearby big city. Families moved there for quieter streets, decent schools, and modest homes. To outsiders, it looked safe. But like many suburban communities in the mid-1990s, Pickering had hidden issues. Economic shifts had a negative impact on many families living there. Youth unemployment was rising. Drug use, particularly among teenagers experimenting, was increasing and becoming more prevalent. For many young people, home life was also unstable. For others, school felt alienating. Some drifted between friends' houses, shelters, and the streets. The 6 boys in this story, who would later be grouped together as the Lost Boys, did not come from identical backgrounds. Some were described as rebellious, others were simply restless. A few had histories of running away. But you need to remember this, as it later shapes how their disappearances were treated. Because when a teenager with a reputation for leaving home goes missing, the assumption is often simple. He will come back. But these boys did not. On the night of Friday, March 17th, 1995, the group attended a St. Patrick's Day house party in Pickering. Reports indicate that the boys had been drinking and celebrating when they decided to leave together sometime after midnight. Shortly before 12:50 a.m., they left the party with plans of goofing around, as many teenagers might say. Their destination was the East Shore Marina on Frenchman's Bay in Lake Ontario, a popular local spot near Pickering. The 6 teenagers of our story are as follows: Jay Boyle, 17. Michael Cummins, 17. Robert Rumbolt, 17. Jamie Lefebvre, 17. Daniel Higgins, 17. At 1:48 a.m., surveillance footage captured 3 of the boys, Michael, Jamie, and Robbie, walking around the marine area. The clip represents the last confirmed footage showing any of the boys that night. Despite the other 3 boys, Jay, Chad, or Danny, not being seen in the video, it was believed they were also there. It is also believed that their purpose there was to steal a 14-foot imitation Boston whaler boat, as well as a water tricycle reportedly stolen from a different marina, and they took them out for a joyride on the frigid waters of Lake Ontario.
Okay, I just want to say, before we started recording, I said, judging by the lights Jared's got on in the room today, I think these boys drowned in the water somewhere. I knew nothing about this case. Did I not say that?
You did say that.
You did, yep.
Shortly after the theft was reported to have happened, some local residents reported hearing the unmistakable sound of a motorboat on Lake Ontario between approximately 2:30 and 3 a.m. After that, nothing. By morning, not one of the 6 boys had returned home. These were just your average teenagers, students, sons, friends, and in some cases, young men with ambitions and struggles typical of others their age. Some even had some brushes with the law. One was even a father. On that night, each one of them were expected to come home regardless of their histories, but they did not. When the families of the boys, as well as their friends, realized they had not come home, worries began to grow. Despite these growing concerns, it reportedly took around 36 hours from the time the boys were last seen for police and search teams to mount a full investigation in and around Lake Ontario. In larger cities, some kids going missing was not considered abnormal, and some people, including the police, may have believed they simply ran away or would just show up eventually. But as time passed and there was no sign of them, it was finally taken seriously. And for that reason, it was because police gained interest in the case when they linked the stolen boats to the missing boys. Once the investigation was opened into finding the missing boys, the search involved the following: Durham Regional Police Services, Toronto Police Marine Unit, Canadian Coast Guard, Canadian Forces aircraft. This included a Hercules C-130, as well as helicopters from Canadian Forces Base Trenton, and hundreds to thousands of volunteers searching by land, water, and air. Despite these resources, the initial search was called off after 2 days and failed to produce any physical evidence linked to the boys. No bodies, no boat wreckage, no clothing or other belongings. It was as if they had vanished off the face of the earth.
Did the CCTV footage see the boats driving off?
No. It only showed them walking to the marina and at the marina, but nothing beyond that.
But indeed, these boats were stolen when
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they were reported stolen, which is why the police were able to link their disappearance with the boats being stolen in the first place. On the day after the searches began, reports emerged that 2 vessels, the 14-foot imitation Boston whaler and a 3-wheeled paddle boat, were missing from 2 different marinas in Frenchman's Bay. But more information followed. Over a week later, a red gas can believed to belong to the missing boat was discovered in Wilson, New York, nearly 100 kilometers south of Pickering along the Lake Ontario shoreline. It was identified as being from the boat due to a unique dent on the can itself. While some investigators linked the gas can to the missing boat, others questioned the reliability of this connection due to water currents and timing. This left the gas can being a clue to the missing boys as a possibility at best.
I was going to say, that seems pretty far-fetched.
Yeah, that's the dent I recognized in that gas can. It was from that boat. Like, to me, that's a little bit of a stretch, but
I think they just didn't have any answers and they were looking for literally anything.
I don't know. I feel like if I had a very specific dent in my gas can, I would note that in my mind. I take care of my stuff.
Yeah, so, I mean, but that's why there was contention for it. Some people, like you, Brandon, a dent in a gas can, like how could it really be yours versus you?
Me, I'm pissed if I dent my gas can. Like, I take care of my things, so if I dent one of my valuable things, even if it's a gas can, I make note of it.
But then there's probably 100 different ways that gas can could have ended up like that.
But it's a very specific dent.
Allegedly.
Everybody label your things.
Since the search was called off, investigators from Durham Regional Police largely concluded the following. The group of boys stole the boat and the 3-wheeled paddle boat from 2 local marinas. They drove the water vehicles out onto the cold open waters of Lake Ontario without life jackets or navigational aids. After this, they capsized the vessels or were lost and likely succumbed to hypothermia in the frigid waters. Crucially, though, no bodies, no boats, no personal effects from the boys have ever been officially tied to the incident by police.
That was going to be my question. It's like one thing not to find the bodies, but they didn't find either of the vessels.
No, there was no sign of anything.
So that I don't know how you explained it, but you could only get so far with that water tricycle, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's not a long distance vehicle, that's for sure.
No, it'd be, you're on it for what, 15, 20 minutes and then you're off?
Yep. We will get to more of the theories later, but this was the initial one that was proposed by police investigators.
Let me ask you boys, we're going on a boat heist. We got a motorized boat and a water tricycle. Which one are you stealing?
If you were a group of teenagers, you're not going to be like, oh, that water tricycle looks fun. You're like, hey, let's steal a motorboat and let's take it out for a joyride on the lake.
Well, I was going to say there was either not enough room on the motorboat, or at first they were like, hey, this looks fun, let's steal it.
Okay, so Boston Whaler, judging by these pictures, you could definitely fit 6 people in here comfortably.
Yeah, unless all the teenagers were like 6'3", 6'4". Like,
you'd be cozy for sure, but it could be done.
They could still fit.
It's a pretty dinky looking boat though.
It is. Definitely not meant for nighttime driving.
A whaler, I thought it was going to be like a big...
I expected something bigger and more grand, right? Like,
further complicating the case, there was no underwater search reported in the initial days, leaving large areas of Lake Ontario unexplored. The longer time that had elapsed before search teams were organized to go investigate, the more likely it was that evidence could drift, sink, or be lost forever.
It's reasonable that the boat could sink and be lost forever, but bodies usually tend to float back up to the surface after a few days when they drown.
Yeah, exactly. In the 2010s, a private investigator named Bruce Ricketts began working the case on behalf of family members, reviewing surveillance footage and searching for witnesses in the case. Ricketts identified possible unidentified individuals in the marina footage, including 1 male and 2 females present shortly after the boys were recorded, and questioned why certain cameras stopped recording at key times.
This is a precursor to the Epstein files.
Despite years of work and appeals for public assistance, Ricketts passed away in January of 2024 and was never able to find definitive new evidence. Moving back to 1995, 3 years after this, after the boys went missing, a possible clue did turn up, however, but in a morbid way. In 1998, a pair of red pants containing human remains were found in the Niagara River that some initially believed could belong to one of the missing teens. Jay, one of the boys who was missing, was last reported to be seen wearing a pair of red Levi jeans the day the boys all went missing. The remains were sent off to a forensic lab for DNA testing. Unfortunately, DNA tests and the remains excluded them from being related to any one of the boys, leaving this clue unresolved in its own right.
Well, I feel like if it's at the Niagara River, that's likely, I hate to say it, probably a jumper going over the falls type of situation. It's kind of a hotspot for people trying to take their lives.
It is, but there's been no updates since then about who this could potentially be. So that's a little bit concerning in of itself.
Also, I want to say one more thing about that, is that the Niagara River would be the opposite way the current is going from Pickering.
Yeah, so that's why it got also dispelled fairly quickly. So when we get into some of the theories, they talk about the currents and how plausible it is that certain things could have turned up in certain places. The disappearance of the lost boys has had a long-lasting impact on the Pickering community, as well as the teens' families. Even to this day, families commemorate the anniversary of their disappearance every March 17th. So now we're coming up on 31 years this March. Friends and relatives continue to hope for the closure they so deserve. And this case remains one of Canada's most discussed unsolved mysteries, featured on various social media platforms just like this one. So now we're going to get into the theories. So theory number 1 is the official theory, which I had mentioned in the beginning by the police, which is accidental drowning after boat theft. Police believe the boys stole the motorboat from the marina and ventured out onto Lake Ontario in the early hours of March 17th. The water temperature was near freezing. The prevailing theory holds that the boat capsized, as well as the water tricycle, or became disabled in some way, leading to hypothermia and drowning. So some of the evidence that supports this is the missing boat from the marina, which was the Boston Whaler, the sounds of motorboats between 2:30 and 3 a.m. that was reported by the residents, the surveillance footage showing the 3 boys walking to the marina in the early morning hours. The weather and water conditions for March were incredibly cold, and they're typically near freezing, so survival time in the water was very, very low.
I want to talk about the water tricycle a little bit. What I'm picturing in my head of a water tricycle is like 3 giant, like buoyant wheels.
That's what it is.
And like a boat, if you get water in the boat, it'll fill up and sink. A tricycle, you can flip it upside down and it's still not going to sink if it's got those buoyant wheels.
Exactly. So where did it go? So problems with this theory are that no bodies were ever found and there's no physical evidence whatsoever. So if they didn't see the marina footage, there would have been absolutely no reason for them to search the lakes.
Could you imagine?
There's also no boat wreckage. Like you said, the tricycle is never found. The 14-foot boat was never found either.
And like Brando said, you only got to pedal a water tricycle for 15 minutes before you get tired.
And that's while they're intoxicated.
So you're not going far.
Right.
But that is something to note here, that they were pretty intoxicated operating this vehicle at the time. So we're going to get into the second theory, and that's the drift and currents theory. So they were lost beyond the initial search zone. So the alternate theory to the one that I stated previously, pretty much everything is the exact same, except the boys did perish on the lake, but their boat and bodies drifted far beyond the original search area due to complex currents in Lake Ontario. So some reasons for this would be the red gas can that was believed to be linked to the missing boat was reportedly found in Wilson, New York, 100 kilometers away. Lake Ontario is actually known for unpredictable shifting currents, depending on the wind, the weather, and other seasonal factors. So it's not impossible for something like that to happen. There's also deep sections of the lake that exceed 800 feet, making underwater recovery extremely difficult. So if we go back to the episode that Sergeant Jeff and I did on the Edmund Fitzgerald, and we looked at Lake Superior, it is also an incredibly deep lake. So the problem with this theory is it still does not explain the complete absence of any confirmed bodies or wreckage or anything. And there has been no confirmed sonar discoveries in decades. So if they were going through a certain area that they thought it was going to be, there's no wreckage or anything that shows up.
Do people ever, like, as a hobby, just go on their boats and put their sonar out just to see what they could find? You would think there'd just be some weekend hobbyists, like, trying to find this boat and these boys.
I think the sonar technology that's commercially available isn't strong enough to produce data that, or even images that would show that there's something at the bottom of the lake. It's more meant for, like,
especially
fishing.
in 1998 or...
Hey, I mean, go back to our Ogo Pogo episode. Those guys were using sonar and all that.
Yeah, that was a little bit more advanced, though. That wasn't, like Brando said, 1995. That was like the 2000s and beyond that. So they had better technology available.
They'd have access to better technology.
Yeah. So our next theory is foul play at the marina. Some believe the boys may have never gone out on the lake at all. Instead, something may have happened on land, possibly involving the other individuals seen in the surveillance footage near the marina. Private investigator Bruce Ricketts noted unidentified individuals, like I mentioned before, the man and 2 women, on surveillance tape shortly after the boys were recorded. The other thing about the area was that it was entirely isolated, and the sudden disappearance of 6 people without a trace is statistically unusual. So the problem with this theory, though, was there was no sign of a struggle anywhere. There was no blood, weapons, or physical evidence ever found. And a coordinated foul play involving 6 victims would be extremely loud and would never not leave evidence. You'd have to be insanely meticulous to make sure there was no evidence left behind.
Well, it would be Dexter up in there, right? Like,
Yeah.
be the-
And there's also 0 witnesses in it whatsoever.
Did they ever get any police dogs on this case, like tracking the scent to see if it indeed ended at the docks?
I don't know about that specifically, but amongst the hundreds and thousands of volunteers, I would assume they would have done a search of some sort that turned up nothing.
Right. Because we never have any direct evidence that they went and stole these boats.
No, not direct evidence other than seeing them on the camera and then shortly after hearing the boat and it's missing. So I think you can put those two together and make a pretty well-educated assumption. So the next theory is one that's not as popular as the other ones, and that is
Aliens.
a deliberate disappearance, or the runaway theory. This theory suggests that the boys may have staged their disappearance to start new lives elsewhere. But the problem with this is there's no supporting evidence of this whatsoever. So the biggest problem with this is 6 coordinated disappearances would require extraordinary amounts of planning from people who, no offense, had insanely high IQ levels and were able to evade law enforcement for the last 30 years. There's no bank activity, confirmed sightings, or any credible leads, and the families insist that there were no warning signs whatsoever. The next theory that we see come up is a boat collision with a larger vessel potentially could have happened. Some speculate that the boys may have taken the boat onto the open water and collided with a larger commercial or private vessel which left the scene intentionally or unknowingly. Since they were driving at night, the visibility out there would have been extremely limited, and commercial traffic exists on Lake Ontario in terms of fishing, but also different freighters, transporting goods back and forth, and so on. A collision would also explain the rapid sinking and the lack of evidence found at the surface. However, counter to that, if a collision happened, there'd be small pieces that should be seen at the surface of the water. There are also no damage reports for any of the ships that were on Lake Ontario that night, and maritime collision investigators typically document such events, because they have to, for insurance purposes, but also for police records.
It seems very easy to steal a boat, by the way. Do people just leave keys in a boat? Do boats have keys?
I mean,
Well,
for this thing,
not for that.
for the Boston Whaler, if
It's
just the engine that's on the back, you just pull it like
yeah.
a lawnmower.
Right.
You don't need keys for it whatsoever. And if they just broke into the marina and took off, it's the easiest thing they could
And
do.
again, what we learned at our last episode, yes, there were video cameras there, but the type of security back then was not what it is now. So I think that's how they were able to evade that type of stuff.
And it was at night too, so even if the cameras were going, it'd be pretty obscured, you would think.
Yeah, they didn't go and pick out the fanciest boat there, right?
It was more practical.
The water tricycle?
No, the
whaler.
The whaler
Yeah.
boat.
Because if we're talking about practicality, I think the water tricycle is the least.
But it looks the most fun. I'll say that.
That's true.
The Boston Whaler, do we know who owned that boat?
Not in any records that I was able to find,
No.
but that was the person who was able to identify the gas can due to the unique dent. So
And he obviously had no connection to the boys.
Nope.
Okay.
That guy really missed his gas can. I can relate.
So the final theory is the multiple events theory, which is a hybrid explanation which suggests a sequence of events, perhaps minor foul play or confrontation that led to panic, after which the boys fled onto the lake, resulting in the accidental drowning. So this is kind of just a blend of everything else put together, but what I want to drive home at the end of all this here is that they're all variations of the first proposed theory, which is the police one, which is to me the most plausible one, but they're all variations of the same thing. All right, so what did you guys think of the theories? Which one stands out the most to you as being the most plausible or the most interesting?
So the most boring thing I could say right now is the theory number 1, because it does make the most sense. But you know me, I like to go out in left field. So I think the boys went there on purpose. You were saying how like one was a father, some were in trouble like crime wise, just maybe not doing very well. We don't know a ton of that information. Maybe they were in trouble with some other people. Maybe they knew that boat was there. I don't know. They went there. Maybe people met them there. I don't know. They went out onto the water. Maybe they wanted to start new lives. I know that was one of the theories, but that would explain a different ship meeting them out on the water, getting the boats onto that ship, driving off, starting new lives.
That's incredibly extravagant, but yeah.
That's
it does explain the boats not showing up.
That's like a movie level, like start new life, disappear into the mist.
But I can't think of another reason why. Like they would have had their wallets on them, like how they've never made a bank like deposit or withdrawal or anything like that. So it's like they just wanted to leave their old lives, make new ones. I don't know. I can't make sense of any of the other ones. It didn't seem like they were leaving a lot behind. I don't know.
I've got a theory as to how the tricycle boat got so far. What if they decided to use the tricycle boat as kind of like, I was thinking of like the skis, like water skis?
Oh, yeah.
Or like a tube. I feel like maybe they tied the tricycle boat to the one with the engine just to like, have fun.
Yeah.
Go flying, like go over some waves and it's like a tube. That explains how the tricycle boat could have gotten so far, is if it got towed by the bigger boat.
Yeah, that would make sense. But yeah, I think we can all agree that the tricycle on its own would not make it far. It would be in and around that bay at best. I don't think they could go any further than that. But if they drowned in that location and the currents were crazy and somehow sucked them way out into Lake Ontario to a depth of 800 feet, that is like some freak currents that are completely unknown about. So,
or what if, you're a 17-year-old kid and you're drunk? I don't know why you would do this other than that reason, but they picked up the tricycle boat, put it inside the motorboat, and took off with it inside the boat.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of the time where we put a shopping cart on top of our buddy's bed when we were drunk. Why? Because it was funny and stupid.
Maybe they got intoxicated to muster up the courage to leave. Maybe they had one last big hurrah party, their friends, and they had their plan and they left. There's just I've been trying to go through this the entire episode, and there's no way that the bodies are one thing, but the boats. I have no idea how they wouldn't have not found the boats unless they had that plan to get rid of them.
See, I've got the opposite reasoning. I can understand why the boats weren't found. Well, the big boat at least. The trike boat, that would be hard to sink. But yeah, the bodies would float up eventually.
Yeah, that to me is the biggest thing. I could see circumstances in which boat wreckage would never come to the surface. But as for bodies, I don't think so, especially in an open boat. There's not a concealed or a covered cab inside this boat, so their bodies literally will be in the water, free floating for the most part, and nothing was ever found. So that's the thing that theory number one makes the most sense to me. It's the most bland, vanilla, if you will, explanation. But the thing that deters me from that is the fact that there's been no physical evidence found whatsoever.
I have another idea, just came to mind, is that the boat or boats have been found, but whoever found them doesn't know about the case. It probably just washed up on cottage country or on an island, and some person with a cottage says, "Hey, a boat washed up. We'll just keep this for the cottage."
I mean,
at least a trike boat.
Stranger things have happened.
It's a trike boat it's a toy. It's so insignificant. If that washed up on my property, I'd probably just keep it and have fun with it. I wouldn't think about this was probably a crucial piece of evidence in a 6-person missing case. It's just, oh, hey, a toy. Cool, I'm going to keep this.
See, I think that's the thing too, is I would think in my head initially seeing something like that, I would report it immediately, but not everybody is going to have that mindset.
Because you would think that there was an accident.
Yeah, like why is there a random boat washed up on my beach,
But
basically?
then if there was no struggle, right? There wasn't any blood in there. There was no articles of clothing. Like their keys fell out of their like anything.
I'm just thinking of like when you go to the beach and you just find random toys in the sand that the kids forgot. You find little boogie boards and little this and little that. I can just imagine a boat washing up on some property and it being no big deal. Like, oh, it's some kid just was irresponsible with their toy and they lost it and now it's mine.
But that would have caught a lot of attention though, right? Like
if you didn't know about
six missing teenagers.
Yeah, I think everybody in and around that specific area would know about that.
Especially back then, like everybody watched the news, right? And that would have been in newspapers and
radios,
all that stuff.
All
right?
it takes is one person who hasn't heard about it and it washes up on their property and then that's it.
Yep, for sure.
Because I don't think somebody could outmuscle 6 teenage boys. Like you hear about these things with females, but to take on all these 17, 18-year-old boys.
Yep.
I don't think foul play wise.
But like Jared said, the currents are kind of unpredictable. So maybe this thing was out for a few months or something. And then it washed up when the case was already starting to be forgotten.
I mean, it could have also actually washed up somewhere in New York or I would say on the state side who they aren't getting the information from the Canadian side.
They wouldn't have known.
They wouldn't know. I'd say that almost makes, I wouldn't say makes more sense because your theory, Pat, makes a lot of sense too. But I would find on the American side, there would be much less people who would know about the case compared to the Canadian side.
Yeah, I definitely think the boat's been seen again, but it just hasn't been connected to this case. At least the trike boat. The other boat, I think that one's on the bottom of the lake.
The other thing too that I noticed is Boston whaler boats are typically known for being extremely buoyant and not sinking. So that's also something to take into consideration too. But again, it is just a piece of metal that if something happened, you know, what if they hit a buoy or something in the bay somewhere and it dented the boat in some way and there was a leak and they were just kept going and they didn't notice it because they were drunk. And then eventually when they got out and they noticed there was too much water, it sank.
Too much water. They used up all their gas, right? Like,
because that's the other thing too, in terms of like what you would want to see done now if you had options. And I think a revisit of the sonar passes, at least from boats with the newer technologies for sonar, would be very beneficial to this case because the families are still like grieving and they don't know what happened. They have no answers whatsoever. So I think a sonar pass, but also doing it from the fact that, okay, a Boston whaler with a full tank of gas, this is how far it could make it, and then draw that onto the lake. And then based on the currents at the time, you can kind of go from there. But
or even hop in a helicopter and get like an aerial view, right?
Well, they tried that at the time and they didn't find anything. The one thing I found interesting was they used a C-130, which is big, like passenger plane. It's massive, but it flies really, really high. So it can see a larger area of the lake versus a helicopter that's flying lower and would see a lesser area of the lake, but be able to see fine details. To me, since it was such a small boat and there were 6 people, you're not going to see much in the C-130. Not unless you had some crazy binoculars that you were looking down at the lake with, but even then it's going to be hard to see. There's going to be waves that are breaking and you're not going to be able to pick out a little piece of clothing here or like a body here. It's going to be really difficult.
I don't know much about maritime law, but isn't it legally required to have life jackets on every boat?
Yeah, you're supposed to.
According to how many people can fit in that boat?
Yeah, I think back in 1995, the rules were much less than they are now. But in terms of what they should be doing is they also shouldn't be stealing a boat that's not theirs and taking it out onto the lake. So I don't think they had life jackets. Well, they didn't have life jackets on at all.
And if it was mid-March, not many people are out on the water yet, right? It's still freezing cold.
Yeah, exactly. The water in the lake has just thawed, or maybe it's still frozen in some areas too. You know, that's something too.
I was about to say, yeah, maybe they
drove out and they hit like a patch of ice or something, or like a little mini iceberg or something that was still in the water, and that gouged the bottom of the boat, and that's what caused it to sink.
Yep.
That could be a plausible explanation as well.
Maybe somebody was using that gas can as a makeshift door like they did in Titanic.
Yeah. So after almost 31 years, the Lost Boys of Pickering are still officially considered missing, and their disappearances remain a cold case. Despite interest in the case, there has been no conclusive evidence that has ever emerged to tell the story of what happened that night. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of this story is the limbo the families endure. There were no bodies, no confirmed crime scenes, no arrests, just the unknown. Parents searched high and low. They walked through neighborhoods, distributing posters with smiling photographs and hopeful descriptions. Last seen wearing, or if you have any information, please contact this number. The torment these families endure is one that is considered the worst. Through many solved cases, relatives and friends of victims all say the worst part of their case was not knowing. Although decades have passed, hope does remain. Police periodically review old cases with new technologies. Families and investigators sometimes pursue DNA databases and renewed search methods. Public tips can still help authorities to this day reach new breakthroughs. So if anyone has verifiable information, no matter how small it is, it's encouraged to contact the Durham Regional Police Service or Crime Stoppers and report anything that you could possibly link to this case. The Lost Boys of Pickering vanished from a quiet Ontario community on a spring night in 1995 and have never been found. Although investigators believe they passed away due to a boating accident, there's no physical evidence that has ever confirmed this. Their story remains one of Canada's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. Whether through new evidence, renewed searches of the lake bed, or unexpected tips from the public, there is always hope. Hope that the truth of what happened to these 6 boys may one day be known and the families can finally have their closure that they so deserve.
Do you think we'll ever have new breakthrough evidence in this case?
I think if they do sonar sweeps of the lake in unsuspecting areas, I think they could potentially find evidence. But that requires an immense amount of resources and a lot of luck.
That's always one of my biggest hopes with doing these unsolved cases is that a year from now or something like that, we'll come and revisit this and be like, hey, it was actually solved.
The pro in terms of something sinking to the bottom of Lake Ontario is that it's super cold down there and it would likely preserve a lot of evidence.
Yep, that's what happened at the Edmund Fitzgerald. It was at such a low point in Lake Superior that it's like the bodies were preserved down there and they're still left down there to this day. All right, so what do you guys think of the case?
I love the open-endedness of it, and I love how our minds can just go in a million different directions and nobody knows if we're right or wrong, or I don't know. These are the cases that I really enjoy doing, but I know it's really tough for the families, so I feel for them for these ones.
So do you think this case was handled properly by the police?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Did you say that they only searched for 2 days?
Yep. They called it off after 2 days worth of searching.
So that's probably my biggest problem right there. It's like, these are somebody's loved ones and you gave up after 2 days. Like, I don't know.
And it began 36 hours after they disappeared, which was a very crucial window for finding any potential evidence.
Yep, especially out on the water.
Yep.
Yep.
It's hard though. Like, you'd think you'd find one little tiny piece of evidence. You had 6 boys that went missing. Not a single piece of evidence? Like, that's so strange. I don't understand.
This is a perfect segue into our trivia, actually. Are you guys ready?
Let's do this. I'm looking for my first W.
Question number 1. At 4 degrees Celsius water temperature, how long would it take for critical hypothermia to set in? Is it A, 2 to 3 minutes? B, 10 to 15 minutes? C, 20 to 30 minutes? Or D, an hour?
I'm going to say 10 to 15 minutes. Critical hypothermia, you mean death?
Just to the point, specifically where your muscles stop working and you can't keep yourself afloat anymore.
What was the first option again?
2 to 3 minutes.
I'm going to change my answer. I'm going to say 2 to 3 minutes.
I'm going B.
The correct answer is B, 10 to 15 minutes.
I'm just literally thinking of the Titanic, and I remember Jack was in the water for a little bit, and I know how they tried to make that as realistic as possible. He was still like moving around and stuff and talking and like.
All right, question 2. This is true or false. You must wait a minimum of 24 hours before reporting someone missing.
False.
False.
That is correct. The common misconception is that you have to wait 24 hours before reporting someone missing, but that is not the case at all. You can report them missing immediately.
I thought you were going to, because it was like, I know with like a younger kid, like you, like it could be 10 minutes, it could be an hour, whatever. You report it. But I was wondering just with like 17, 18-year-olds, oh, they could just be off gallivanting, doing teenager boy things or whatever. And
that's the big thing here is that police took 36 hours before effectively taking it seriously, when it should have been taken seriously when 6 different families came all saying the same thing. My son's missing. Where's my son?
I can't get over that either. 36 hours.
All right, question number 3. What percentage of missing person cases for children specifically is attributed to runaways? Is it A, 25%, B, 50%, C, 75%, or D, 85%?
I'd go 50%.
I'll say 75%.
The correct answer is 75%.
Ooh, we're all
You
tied
guys
up.
tied this. Approximately 70% of all resolved runaway cases are closed in how many days? 2, 3, 4, or 5?
Let's go A. 2 days.
3 days.
Correct answer is 3 days. All right, that's another one for Pat.
You know what? Maybe I'm just letting him get all high and mighty and confident just to squash him in the next 4. So,
Well, we'll have to wait and see. So that's going to end our episode for the night. If you have any ideas or want your story featured on the show, please email us at strangeandundecided@gmail.com. As always, thanks for listening.
and
Good night.